The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening 2019 Nintendo Switch Remake. Yawn. Yeah, this game offends me. However, I appear to be in a minority with this opinion. I've had a particularly hard time finding fans of the original version of Link's Awakening with whom to interview. Of the people I did interview, most of them hadn't really gotten into Link's Awakening until playing the 2019 Nintendo Switch Remake. There was some exposure to the Game Boy or Game Boy Color versions, albeit limited. In today's video, I'm going to spotlight the perspectives of fellow content creators and friends on the platform, particularly when it comes to their histories with Link's Awakening, and then have them address whether Link's Awakening is a good remake or not. Later, I'll give my own take and draw some conclusions. Enjoy the perspectives, share your own perspectives, and subscribe for more Captain Keaton!
My first exposure was with the remake that came out on the Switch. I had not heard about the game, but with the Switch, when the Switch came out, I made it a mission to play as many Zelda titles as I could, and I really wanted to get into the series because it was kind of one of those things that I had not played a bunch of Zelda. It's a really well-known series, very popular amongst many players, and I was just missing out. So I really wanted to play it, and Switch was the perfect time to do so, and I did.
So I had access to emulators on my PC, and I thought that as a fan of the series, I should play a lot of the titles that I hadn't played before. I had an interest in Zelda 1, but for whatever reason, I avoided that. And at the time, as I was just playing a lot of Game Boy emulation, I came across this YouTuber, HC Bailey, and I only mention the name because he feels like a product of the 2000s, or maybe the 2010s, I think the 2000s that people can connect with, where he was doing a lot of Let's Plays back when they were the primary gaming content. And he had a Let's Play of this Link's Awakening game. I thought, okay, that's interesting. In my head, I mistakenly conflated Link's Awakening with A Link to the Past. Since we never had a Super Nintendo Entertainment System, I never got my hands on Link to the Past. And I just mistakenly assumed that they were one and the same or pretty similar titles. So I'm watching him play this game that I thought I'd heard so many good things about. I decided I would give it a whirl, and I downloaded the DX version. And my experiences with the DX version were fine. I'm not going to say they were incredible or amazing, but obviously you had me on here to talk about something. So I do have good things to say about Link's Awakening. But with the DX version in particular, it was a little bit underwhelming. And in my head, I'm just thinking, what? This is what people like about Link's Awakening or Link to the Past? Again, I was conflating the two titles, not having seen them. That obviously became clarified many, many years later. It's funny to look back on thinking that I was playing the great Zelda game, the phenomenal 2D Zelda. And it was that.
So this is tricky because I would have to say, like, technically speaking, my first exposure was probably seeing the box art at a Toys R Us and wanting to get it and not getting it. I had a pitiful Game Boy collection as a kid. I want to say that by the end, before I moved on to like the Game Boy Advance and didn't really get any other Game Boy games, I think the last few games I had were a really crappy licensed Godzilla game, a really crappy Batman game, Pokemon Blue and Yellow, because every kid had Pokemon, the Game Boy version of DuckTales, which, great game, and Conker's Pocket Tales, which was a weird, like, adventure style, almost Zelda style, but not really nearly as good adventure game where you play as Conker before the Bad Fur Day rebranding. So it was still like light and cute and fun, as opposed to like him drinking and vomiting and pissing all over the place. And that was it. So I want to say, like, I didn't actually get a chance to play Link's Awakening until I think I may have emulated it, or maybe I know for sure I downloaded it on my 3DS. I bought the 3DS version, and I don't think I finished those versions for whatever reason. And then eventually, when they came out with the Switch remake, I bought that, and then I beat that version. So that is my whole like experience with Link's Awakening. Very strange, very like touch and go, until eventually, like, okay, finally able to beat it.
So I never had a Game Boy. I wasn't really into handhelds just because I wasn't a fan of like the color of the screen in the Game Boy and all that. But I did have a neighbor that had a Game Boy, and he had a good number of games for it. And that's where I first actually had seen the game. Unfortunately, didn't put much time into it in the game at that point. So I didn't know too much about it. And really it was, I'm going to say, I really started collecting, and I used to have like quite a Zelda collection, and because I wanted to at least try a lot of the games. I was going to say, I want to try every game. And so what I did as a compromise is I was like, oh, I can play it on the Super Game Boy. I ended up buying the DX version of Link's Awakening. And I was really pleasantly surprised about the game, because I always think of it as a kind of like Zelda side quest is usually how I typically think about it. Because when you look up the game and all that, and how it's, takes place after Link to the Past, and how it goes is, I believe that he was going for training on an island, and he was coming back from the training when the storm hit and thunder hit his wrecked his boat, and the story goes from there.
So, do you think the Nintendo Switch remake is a good remake of Link's Awakening?
No, I don't think it's a good.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a good remake. I think it's a great remake. I think it's really, really well made. Now that you told me the date 2019, now I realize that it's been quite some time since I played it. And for me to remember a lot of the moments, and I know they're not vivid memories, but to remember the moments of a game that I played almost 5 years ago tells me that I really enjoyed the game. And it's definitely something like it kind of stands out. It sticks out to you from the very beginning. I noticed that when I was playing the Game Boy Color version, that the opening cutscene is not there. So they added some cinematics to the Switch version that really sort of bring in a little bit more context to the story, to the plot, that I appreciated once I looked at the Game Boy Color version. And then from there, just the overall worlds, environments, the colors just stand out so much. I mean, Nintendo does an amazing job with their art, with their design, and the colors really pop in this game. And just the world feels so lively. It's a really, really well-made game.
Nothing different than what I described earlier when the game came out, and I thought that's great for everybody who hasn't played it. It looks incredible, so first-timers are going to have a great time in that regard, but I don't need to replay the game again. I already experienced it. And it ended up being a very pleasant surprise when I did play through it again, not only to appreciate the graphics and what they had done, but also because the game was so much better than I first remembered it. So the Switch remake is a remake done well, I suppose, though, because everything can be criticized, nothing is perfect. I thought that one of the things they added to the remake was the color dungeon at the end of the game, which was a lot of fun to progress, but it still on its own wouldn't have been enough. And then somebody rightfully pointed out in my comment section, no, the color dungeon actually existed. And I'm going, okay, shoot. So what did they actually give us that's new then? I don't know.
I'll help you out a little bit. So the things that are considered new, one is obviously the visual style. They rebuilt that from the ground up with a toy box aesthetic. The music is orchestrally arranged, and then there is that build your own dungeon thing. I don't know if you messed with that.
Right. I did. And because I love that sort of thing, I love making maps and getting creative, but that is more a tool for a multiplayer experience. Get your friends to play your dungeons, that sort of thing. And so beyond just doing a basic dungeon layout, there was only so much time that I was going to invest into it.
So one thing I want to comment on is that while I do like the remake, one thing that I think would have been hard to replicate in the remake is how good the sword feels in the original. That's something that always stuck out to me, was just like, there's just something about how Link swings his sword in the original version that feels like it's just peak game feel. I can't even describe it. It's hard for me to like put to words, but there's just the way he swings his sword is just like perfect. I even like the way he swings his sword in it better than like Link to the Past. Like there's just something about that animation and the sound effect, and the sprite art itself that just feels perfect. Like, again, it's like I said it already, but like they were cooking with this game. Like they really knew what they were doing. It's probably one of the most like impressive like Game Boy games, or at least like original Game Boy games ever made. Like it's so good.
I like the graphic upgrades. The music is good. The sound effects, like some of my favorite sound effects actually in that game are like the birds chirping in the background and stuff like that. So those additions I think are really really good additions to the game. I think they pretty much, it seemed like, because I've only ever played the DX version, and it seemed like really like pretty parallel to that, except for like the dude taking the photos, if I remember correctly, because I don't think he's in the Switch. But other than that, it seemed to be pretty much the same thing as the DX game of watching it. But yeah, no, the detail in the game and everything, it looks amazing in terms of that style of graphics and everything. That's the only thing, is like, I don't know how the gameplay is, but the thing I do like watching that is my only gripe about Link's Awakening for the Game Boy the Game Boy Color and all that, is the fact that you have to keep switching. You have to keep switching items and items. It's like, oh my gosh, that did drive me crazy. But like, at least in the Switch version, you can keep your sword and your shield, and then you can just change the like two other items. Like you have like X and Y, and then you have like, so you can access a lot more items. So it's not so much pause and change items.
I think the hallmarks for me personally is staying true to the original content. I think that is a very important factor for people that are looking to enjoy a remake from what they remember playing back in the day. Now, obviously, that's not applicable to me, but I do appreciate that to where you can actually, oh yeah, I remember this scene back when I was playing it on my Game Boy. It kind of brings back those nostalgic memories. I think that is a very important factor whenever designing a remake. But at the same time, I really also appreciate when they make any quality of life changes. Now, once again, I cannot relate to the experience of past, but any type of quality of life improvements, whether it be better fluid controls, the scrolling of the screens, like you mentioned on some of the older games because of limitations that you don't have as much over here, or just in general, tweaks and designs to make your navigation through the game a lot smoother. And like you said, some of the dungeon colors, the way they choose, so it's a little bit easier to navigate. I definitely do appreciate that, and I think are keys to having remake or keys for remakes.
And is remaking a game enough? To me, no, it's not. I mean, the game released at full price. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was a full price Switch game. I don't know, they already had the template there, and it shouldn't have been the hardest remake to do. At the very least, we see that these assets are being reused one more time with Echoes of Wisdom, so Nintendo's getting their money's worth out of the development time. What, in my opinion, then, makes a remake worthwhile, and what should you add to make it a better, more enhanced experience? They should probably have some post-game content. With my experience with the Pokemon games, when they do Emerald compared to Ruby Sapphire, Black 2, White 2, well, those are pretty unique in how they change the game. But that's kind of what I'm leaning towards, is give us some sort of post-game, whether it's a new quest that takes place in the town or with Marin, or even some ability to always call Marin to come with you and to explore the world in a different way. Get creative. It doesn't have to be even something that's necessarily going to fill 2 hours of playtime. It doesn't have to be about that, but it just has to be a little bit different, and it has to make you appreciate it.
I do like the remake. I mean, it is the version that I finished, so I do appreciate it. That being said, I think, like I mentioned before, I am interested in going back and playing the original. I think I am probably going to prefer the original over the remake. There is something very charming and satisfying about the sprite work and the tiles and the just the charming, almost not lo-fi, but just the fact that they had to fit this game onto a Game Boy, and they had to be smart about it and be creative about it, and there's something scrappy, I guess, about the original Game Boy version that I really appreciate, that makes me look back on it with fondness, even though I haven't finished it yet. That being said, the original, the remake is still really good. I really like the kind of toy aesthetic of it. I think it looks really cute. The kind of diorama-esque feeling of the map, I think it's all really cute, and I think it's really unique. I think it gives the game an interesting flavor. I can understand if maybe some people are well, I don't see the original that way, so I don't, maybe not appreciate the visuals because of that. I get that. Maybe would have appreciated the remake to have taken a different turn with its visuals. But I still think it's a unique visual aesthetic, and I'm glad that they decided to carry it over into Echoes of Wisdom, because I think it's a visual style that is worth exploring. It's something that, again, just gives you a unique flavor, makes it feel kind of different. But I can't make too many direct comparisons to the original because my experience with the original is a bit limited, but I do enjoy the remake. I think that from what I understand and from what I've seen of the original, it's pretty solid as a remake. But my opinion is always a remake should never replace the original. And even if you enjoy the remake, you should still go back and play the original.
Time for the Captain's Log. My brief history with Link's Awakening is that I played the Game Boy version from 1993, upscaled on a Game Boy Color in everyone's favorite era, the 90s. We love the 90s. Yeah. This was a unique feature of the Game Boy Color called DMG Mode. According to Capetti.org, it's a hardware review blog, I guess. Nintendo wanted color users to see enhancements with monochrome-only games. And monochrome games are enhanced with color palettes in this mode. My memory fails me on exactly what my version looked like in the 90s. I recently played it with a green primary color and a red accent in what are deemed real Game Boy colors. And while that's how I think I played it back in the day, a viewer sent me footage of his version played with these colors inverted. After scouring the internet, I discovered a Reddit thread where users suggest that the default color palette can be changed by using the D-pad and pressing the A or B button before the screen fades out and the game starts. There appear to be 3 unique color palettes for Link's Awakening, and they're activated by particular button inputs at the start screen. I'll leave links to all these resources in the description box below. Technicalities aside, I am incredibly nostalgic for this version because I played it when I was so young and impressionable. I actually think that the Game Boy version, upscaled on a Game Boy Color, looks superior to Link's Awakening DX, which was made specifically for the Game Boy Color. Something about the limitations and the limited color palette with a slight accent color communicate more of what the game's narrative is going for with lucid dreaming. It feels more realized than it does with more colors. It's something like watching Dorothy enter Technicolor in The Wizard of Oz. There is something surreal, and less is more. This is something I think that the Switch remake also fails to achieve in terms of its aesthetic. I don't hate the toy look of everything. In fact, it looks more than alright. But nothing about it specifically screams, "Hey, I'm dreaming here." It feels more to me like I'm Link and I'm a toy come to life. Link's story is a fine idea, I just don't think Link's Awakening is the best vessel to tell it. Another strong memory for me is that the Game Boy versions have a spectacular soundtrack. Zelda has always had complex ballads, and the ones on the Game Boy seem to hit home for their chiptune scores. Tracks like The Mysterious Forest and Tal Heights still emanate strongly today, while I'll always be nostalgic for Marin on the Beach. The Switch OST is more of a mixed bag. Some tunes are handled delicately and do convey the dreamlike state. I think of Taryn's theme when you wake up in the house, or even the Owl theme. I really don't mind these versions. Most of the rest of the soundtrack feels either too plain, standard, or wonky. Some of them even have more of this island tropical vibe with this weird instrumentation. I don't understand why, but I feel like more was accomplished with chiptune than full orchestration. Why do I prefer Marin singing in synth or chiptune rather than in the Switch version where it's a real woman humming along? I'm likely biased, but I'll play both and let you decide which version is superior. When it comes to gameplay, the Game Boy version's combat is silky smooth. A Rock's Feather spinning slash covers huge portions of the screen, while your equipable arsenal like the hook shot, bow and arrow, magic rod, and the boomerang are incredibly satisfying. You can chain attacks to take out bosses especially quickly and cruise through the game. Compare that to the remake, and man, there is a lot to be missed. The jump appears to reduce Link's range when you're using Rock's Feather. So, when you swing the sword with a spin attack, it isn't nearly as effective as it used to be. The bow and arrow is also fine, but doesn't do as much damage, particularly on the mini-bosses. Boss fights that used to be satisfying to hack and slash to death are now slogfests where you can usually only deal one attack at a time. You have to wait, rinse, and repeat combat strategies. It's that formulaic type of boss battle that we've come to expect out of most games. But the real kicker is that both of the best items from the Game Boy version are completely nerfed: the magic rod and the boomerang. These items used to be insta-kills on enemies. The magic rod was an 8th dungeon item that you would find in Turtle Rock, and it's now all but useless. I find myself firing away with this thing and it not doing nearly what it used to, and that's so disappointing. Meanwhile, the boomerang was a trade sequence secret exclusive item, and it used to be a one-shot kill on most enemies. I actually don't know if it still works on the final nightmare, but in this game, as far as enemies go, it merely stuns them. What the hell? I normally wouldn't care about this because you used to be able to finish Link's Awakening without completing the trade sequence, which, another story about a thing I don't like, but now you have to solve the trade sequence and basically might as well get the boomerang. And so now the fact that you have to get it and it's nerfed is just disappointing. The flip side, if I'm going to give the remake its flowers, is that from a gameplay perspective, the remake does make improvements. The camera now pans with Link through the overworld and portions of the dungeons. This eliminates screen transitions so the game feels less grid-based. While A Link to the Past accomplished this on a console during the same generation as the Game Boy, I also understand how difficult it would have been to pull off on the Game Boy. The other perk to the Switch version is that you can assign items to more than 2 buttons. In my Switch playthrough, I rarely even had to go to my menu. There is certainly a fair share of menu toggling on the original game, and while to me it's not intrusive, it is happening frequently. These, to me, are the 2 primary reasons for you to look into the Switch remake. Damp's Dungeon Creator is a gimmick I could care less about, but the main 2 changes to me are essentially enhancements. The audio and visuals are really up to your preference, but are these enough to warrant this being a good remake? I want to call attention to one more element in my comparisons. I've been playing the Game Boy and Game Boy Color versions back to back and tend to choke up every time I sit on the log with Marin at the beach. She speculates on what life is like beyond the ocean and wishes she was the seagull so she could go see what's out there. When you remind her of your quest and that the walrus is blocking your path, she states, and I quote, "Huh? The walrus wants me to go to him? It doesn't matter. I will go with you to him." In the remake, they changed the line. Huh? The walrus wants me to go to him? Well, alright, let's go. Why did they change this? I normally am not one to care about dialogue, localizations, and changes that are made in that process, but since we already have the English translation from the Game Boy, it calls some things into question. The power of this one line in the original is huge. The whole point of Link's Awakening is that when you wake the windfish, the island and its people will disappear. Marin's existential crisis of what it means to be on Koho Lint is more important than your trivial quest to get a key and unlock the next cave. Hence, it doesn't matter. The new rewrite to, all right, let's go, completely diminishes this feeling. Now she's jolly and excited to get you to move on with your quest. This, to me, is completely tone deaf to what the original game was meant to convey. You want to talk about what it means to be a faithful remake? There is no greater evidence to me that the team behind the remake missed the point. There is one scene, however, where I think the remake succeeds over the original. In Link's Awakening on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, at a certain point in your playthrough, a ghost begins to follow you, makes you bring it to its house, and then its tombstone. In the original game, it felt more like a mandated fetch quest than anything substantive. But when I played it on the Switch remake, something about the way it was portrayed, with its music, its colors, the sobs of the ghost, it just hit different. I was getting all sorts of feelings of what it means to die, temporality, and the meaning of your material belongings. It was so bizarre. I was wondering things like, who is this ghost? What does this represent? What is the meaning of this scene? And in 9 times of playing the Game Boy version back to back, I hadn't felt that with this scene at all. So, I'll give +1 to the remake for having a pretty cool ghost scene. Does it make up for some of the other stuff? Not quite. Not for me anyway. But a cool tidbit regardless. So what is the consensus? One take is that the remake isn't just good, it's great, and brings a great story to life. Another take is that it's probably preferred to the original, but could have used some more new content. Another take is that the remake adds necessary quality of life improvements that would have been much appreciated on the Game Boy. Another take is that the remake is likable, but also fails to replace the feel and charm from the original. My take is that the remake is bizarre, and while it's unique and appreciable for trying new things, isn't entirely faithful towards the original experience. Whatever the take is, though, I think it's awesome there can be so many takes for the game, original or remake. One thing the Zelda series succeeds at is eliciting so many different reactions and perspectives, and the point of my channel is to bring them all together. We don't have to have the same perspective, but we ought to respect them. If it weren't for all the fond perspectives, I would not have even played the Switch remake. And while I may be critical and I may be harsh, it comes from a place of love. I always want my favorite series to be its best possible self.